Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today we have a new painting tutorial where we are creating this winter landscape with a night sky and northern lights of sorts. I ran out of my old watercolor paper, so I'm testing out the Arches cold pressed paper for the first time. I read great reviews about this paper, so I'm excited to give it a go. And I cut out this roughly A5 size piece of it and taped it to my painting board with washi tape. After that, I just drew a few guidelines for the mountains on the horizon, and then we can get to painting. You don't need a sketch for this one, but it will help with this first step. So the first thing we're gonna do is use a clean brush and apply water to the whole sky part, starting from the mountain line. We'll very carefully go around the mountains so that we're not getting any water to them. Having this kind of line in the water is going to prevent the watercolors from blending into any areas we don't want them to, and at this point we only want to keep the color on the sky part. I applied a pretty generous amount of water here, not to the point that there's any pooling on the paper, but enough that the whole paper is clearly wet. And now we'll get to probably the trickiest part of this painting, which is creating the northern lights effect. I would advise you to only stick to a few colors on this whole sky, and the less colorful you make it, the easier it will be to blend those colors together. So I didn't necessarily follow this advice because I wanted there to be some turquoise and a tiny bit of pink. And since my watercolor palette doesn't really have the exact shade of turquoise I was going for, I had to blend these brighter green and blue colors together. It's very difficult to create any sharp northern lights lines or shapes with watercolors. For that kind of effect, you pretty much need to use something different, like gouache paints, for example. So what we'll do instead is create these lighter almost pathways on the sky and then apply the darker blue and black color between these shapes. Now, I know this is easier said than done, especially since we need to work quite fast to not let the paper dry too much. If you apply color on top of an area that has already started to settle, it might create some blooming effect with sharp edges. However, if that happens and your first layer looks a little splotchy, don't worry, we can smooth things out with the second layer. Another thing I point out is that it's better to try to keep the colors separated at first and mostly let them blend together. Some blending is probably required, but to have brighter spots with the colors you choose will require you to not add any darker shades to those spots, so try to work around them as much as possible. You can even take out a clean watercolor brush like I did here and almost push away color from spots you want to keep lighter. You could also use a tissue paper to lightly tap out color from anywhere you feel like got too dark. And I also tried to keep the dark colors here more towards the top part of the sky in general and let the area closer to the mountains be much lighter. But after this first layer, I took a break to let the painting fully dry. It's very important that the first layer is not wet, because otherwise this next step might create a small disaster. So I would say to let the painting dry for at least 20 minutes or use a blow dryer if you're low on time. Anyway, we are repeating the same steps by first adding clear water layer to the whole area, and this time I went over the mountains as well to start adding some very light shadowing there too. After that, you can take color to your brush and start to go over any splotchy areas you had after the first round, and I also wanted to really darken the black areas even further. So I started by going over the dark colors, and I also added more of it kind of to the center of the painting. And then I took the lighter turquoise color and added this to the pathways we created earlier. You don't need to add color to the whole area with this second layer. So if there are lighter spots or colors you don't want to change, you can just let those be. This is why we add the first clear water layer also with this second step, because otherwise you might create sharp edges to any areas you are not trying to add new color on. But after you're happy with the second layer and hopefully manage to blend and deepen things up, we are again letting the painting dry before moving on. This time it doesn't matter if the paper hasn't fully dried though, because all we're doing is adding the white stars. My favorite way is using this splattering technique where you dip a brush into thick white paint. I'm using gouache paint here mixed with a tiny bit of water, and then hit the brush with a pen or other brush over the painting. This will cause these fine white drops to fly all across the surface, and I always like to follow this step by adding some extra stars by hand, but it really creates these perfect fine irregular dots that are very hard to create by hand. But now that the sky is fully done, it's time to move on to the lower part of the painting. My paper was buckling quite a bit here. The washi tape I used on the edges was not strong enough to keep it down. But anyway, I started here by painting these dark evergreen lines under the mountains. There will be a lake here later, so this dark line of small trees is a pretty easy way to separate the mountains from the water reflection. I used a smaller brush here and the very tip of it to create these tiny strokes for the trees, and we are also gonna add some light shadow into the mountains. There's no right or wrong way to do this, so don't worry about this step too much. I'd say that here it's probably better to start with light colors because you can always darken things up, but removing any super dark lines or spots from the mountains will be much more difficult. And if you struggle to visualize the shadow shapes, it might help you to look through pictures of real snowy mountains so that you get a better idea of how they look like. But I usually think that these pretty rough angular shadows, often more on one side of the mountain and maybe towards the lower parts, creates a pretty believable outcome. I also blended the tree line slightly towards the mountains at some spots and then added a snowy island with some bigger trees slightly closer to the bottom edge. But then the last big step of this painting is to create the water reflection, so you can probably guess that we are trying to replicate what we did in the sky. However, you don't need to be quite as careful here, so any turquoise and pink plops in pretty much the right spots will work perfectly. I also tried to leave the space closer to the mountains and the center part lighter as it is in the sky, but I think I could have done a better job here, leaving more of the white snow parts to the reflection as well. I also think I could have added a second layer here as well to darken some of the lower parts, but I admit I was a little impatient and removed the tapes around the painting before I could think to do that. I did, however, add some slight definition to the mountains by adding this shadow line around them so that they stood out against the sky a little bit better. But after that, we are done with this winter night sky landscape. I got my margins slightly and will probably add some sparkle and final edits to this painting on the computer and include it in my upcoming small shop winter collection. But anyway, that's all for this time. I hope you enjoyed following this quick wintry painting and we'll give it a go. If you do, please let me know how it went for you in the comments below. And if this was your first time around here and you'd like to see more art and journaling stuff in the future, definitely consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a lovely day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye bye!